In August 2021, spouses Natalia and Sergei Nagovitsyna set out to conquer one of the most beautiful and challenging peaks in Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, 7,010 meters. This giant, located at the junction of the borders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and China, is a true legend in the world of mountaineering. Conquering 7,000ers and especially 8,000ers is considered the highest level of skill, accessible only to the most experienced and daring. The Nagovitsinas were not beginners. Behind them were many difficult routes. They preferred independent, economical ascents, without guides or excessive comfort. At the base camp under Kyrgyzstan, the starting point and place of acclimatization before the assault, the couple met an international group, Ukrainians and an Italian named Luca Sinigaglia. They decided to climb together. Who could have guessed then that 4 years later, Luca would become a key participant in another drama, would try to save Natalia on Peak Pobeda, and would pay for it with his own life. But that tragedy was still far away. For now, a small but, as it turned out, fateful mishap occurred. While crossing an icy river, Sergei got his boot wet. Wet feet in the mountains are not just discomfort, but a risk of frostbite. The couple made the only correct decision at that moment: return to base camp, dry their gear, and only then continue the ascent. The group went ahead, and the Nagovitsinas stayed behind. A few days later, ready for the assault, they set off for the summit alone, relying on their own strength and experience. The climb was going well. There was very little left to the coveted point. And then the unexpected happened. At an altitude where the air is thin and the body is working at its limit, Sergei suddenly felt unwell. At first, he complained of stomach pain, a common thing in the mountains. They attributed it to food or acclimatization. But his condition worsened with frightening speed. His body stopped obeying, paralysis set in. His speech became slow, incoherent, as if consciousness was fading. Natalia, herself on the edge of physical capability, understood. This was not simple fatigue. This was something serious, mortally serious. Grabbing the radio, she transmitted a distress signal to the base camp. Somewhere far below, people remained, but at such an altitude, time flows differently, and help comes agonizingly slowly. This story, which began as a romantic ascent of two passionate people, turned into a chilling thriller unfolding on a 7,000er, where every step could be the last. The doctors on the radio were adamant. "Natasha, you need to descend yourself. You won't be able to help him in any way. Over." From an altitude of 6,800 meters, where the air turns into a poisonous cocktail of nitrogen and oxygen deficiency, the medic's voice sounded harsh and unambiguous. The rescuer's logic was ironclad. Two bodies are worse than one. A woman left with her paralyzed husband on a 7,000er is not help, but the next victim. But Natalia replied with something not covered by any instructions. "I understand everything, but I will not leave him alone." Sergei, despite his clouded consciousness, tried to persuade his wife. "They know better, go. They know better." He was thinking of her, even as his body ceased to obey. Natalia cut him off briefly and harshly, the way you only speak to those you love to the point of desperation. "Don't mess with my head right now. I've made my decision, that's it." And then the paralyzed, dying husband embraced her. In that embrace, at an altitude of almost 7 kilometers, there were no words, only understanding. She had made the right decision. Not for survival, for love. They spent the night together on the edge of the earth. Sergei alternated between delirium and unconsciousness. His limbs no longer moved, his body was failing. When the sun rose, Natalia saw his face. It had turned black from hypoxia. Oxygen starvation was doing its work, turning a living person into a shadow. Rescuers set out at dawn. Natalia managed to descend on her own to the 6,000-meter mark. This was a feat, considering she had spent almost a day without sleep, warmth, or normal breathing. They tried to evacuate Sergei, but realized it wouldn't work. Too heavy, too high, too late. They wrapped him in a sleeping bag, like a cocoon, and left him on the slope, hoping to return with reinforcements. When rescuers reached the spot the next day, the cocoon was empty. During the night, Sergei had fallen from the face of Khan Tingri. He fell towards Kazakhstan, plummeting more than 2 kilometers. The mountains do not forgive mistakes, but sometimes they take even those who made no mistakes. Circumstances just align that way, a chain of coincidences, a wet boot, a stomach ache, an altitude that spares no one. Natalia survived, and she took with her a knowledge more precious than any summit. Sometimes the only right decision is to be there until the end, even if that end is inevitable. For years later, Natalia found herself again in the kingdom of ice and stone. Her goal was the Snow Leopard program, an unofficial but prestigious title for those who have conquered all 5 7,000ers of the former USSR. The ascent of Pobeda Peak was meant to be the final chord. But mountains often test people's resilience, and even experienced climbers sometimes fall victim to their own ambitions. Natalia set off for Pobeda Peak with an international team: Italian Luca Sinigaglia, German Gunter Siegmund, and 2 men climber Roman Mokritsky. They chose the minimal package from the tour company AKSI Travel: transfer, permits, helicopter drop-off, and then complete autonomy. No guide, with their own tents, food, and equipment. On August 12th, Natalia's group set out for the final assault on Pobeda Peak. At an altitude of about 7,000 meters, the climbers separated, obeying the logic of the mountains. Everyone goes at their own pace. Gunter, the strongest and best prepared, quickly moved ahead and was the first to reach the coveted summit. Luca, sensing his limit, turned back before reaching the ridge with the telling name Camel, 7,041 m. Natalia and Roman continued the journey together. Around 1 in the afternoon, they finally stood on the summit, but by mountaineering standards, this was dangerously late. In the mountains, every hour counts, and the descent promised to be no less challenging. On the way back, Roman contacted the base camp. What he reported chilled even the most experienced rescuers. He and Natalia had fallen from the ridge. The rope connecting them, 20 meters apart, had miraculously caught on something, and they were hanging over the abyss, alive. In the mountains, this is common practice. Cracks are hidden under snow and ice, and if one falls, the second must hold, explained Ilim Karapikov, vice president of the Mountaineering Federation of Kyrgyzstan, later. But here it happened differently. Roman fell and pulled Natalia down with him. Roman managed to climb out and pulled his partner back onto the ridge. An examination revealed something terrible. Natalia had broken her leg. She could not move on her own. He helped her slide into a mulda, a bowl-shaped depression under the rock where she would be at least somewhat protected from the wind, secured her, insulated her as best he could, and left into the night. He walked all night towards the assault camp where Luca and Gunter remained, to bring help. On the morning of August 13th, Luca and Gunter, instead of descending to safety, rested and secure, turned back up the mountain. They took a tent, sleeping bag, stove, gas, everything a wounded woman might need. Around 4 in the afternoon, they radioed in. They had reached Natalia. But the weather, as often happens in the mountains, decided to interfere with human plans. A storm began. The base advised them not to take risks and to spend the night where they were. Luca radioed that the 3 of them were trapped in a small tent at an altitude of 7,190 meters, with the wind raging outside. His sister Patricia would later write, "For those who have never been in the mountains, it's difficult to understand what wind means at 7,000 meters. It's when discarded backpacks are blown into the abyss. Icy particles cut your face, so you can't open your eyes, and the air's speed takes your breath away. It's when you can't see a thing, and every step could be your last, if you can even take a step without being thrown into the void. For people on the edge of the earth, 1 with a broken leg, 3 who refused to abandon her, and the wind howling as if the mountain itself were trying to shake uninvited guests from its icy shoulder." In the morning, Luca and Gunter began their descent. They took the only radio, not because they forgot about Natalia, but because they knew her location was obvious, and they still had to traverse the ridge of death themselves. Besides, Luca had lost a mitten, and his hand, frostbitten by the icy wind, had already begun to go numb. Natalia was told to prepare for 5 days of waiting. Rescuers simply couldn't physically ascend to that altitude any sooner. She nodded, without tears, without hysterics. Only the icy calm of someone who had already looked death in the face once before. Luka and Gunter reached the assault camp where Roman was waiting. Together they began descending to Pobeda Peak at 5,800 meters. Every step was a struggle, but they moved on, tired, frostbitten, but alive. On August 15th at 5 a.m., Roman radioed in another storm. They dug a cave in the snow, the only refuge in this white hell. When the weather eased slightly and they could continue the descent, Luka suddenly began to lose heart. Panic in the mountains is the worst companion. By evening, the Italian had lost control of himself. His speech became incoherent, his movements chaotic. Over the radio, the doctor listened to the descriptions, and his voice grew darker with each word. Cerebral edema. At that altitude, it's a death sentence. The man who 4 years ago had met Natalia and her husband on the approaches to Kontingri, who back in 2021 barely spoke English and whom she and Sergei simply invited along. Come with us. This man died trying to save her. The price of a friendship forged on icy slopes proved to be a life. On August 16th, the Kyrgyz Ministry of Defense dispatched to me. 8. The plan was simple. Drop rescuers as high as possible so they could reach Natalia on foot. But the mountains intervened again. Turbulence tossed the machine like a splinter. Visibility dropped to 0. The result, a hard landing on the edge of a glacier. The rescuers themselves had to be rescued, some with fractures. The helicopter had transformed from a means of salvation into yet another victim of the mountain. Natalia remained alone at 7,190 meters with a broken leg, no radio, no contact with the world, not knowing that Luka was dead, that the rescuers had crashed, and that time was working against her with every minute. On August 19th, a drone flew over the icy prison, and the operators saw the incredible. From a torn tent at an altitude of nearly 7 kilometers, Natalia was waving at them. Alive. Through the wind, cold, and 2 weeks of solitude, she was signaling to the world that she was still holding on. On August 20th, 4 brave men set out to reach her. The group was led by Vitaly Akhimov, a climber who had survived the Mi-8's hard landing and a back injury. But at the 6,100-meter mark, his injury flared up and the weather began to deteriorate again. The team made an agonizing decision. Turn back. Going further would mean risking several more lives. On August 25th, weather forecasters promised a break, a short window when the mountain might release its victim. The chances that Natalia had survived after so many days were practically non-existent, but the organizers decided to give her one last chance. The plan was bold: a high-altitude helicopter with an Italian pilot, who by that time had already flown to Kyrgyzstan to retrieve Luka's body. The Italians agreed to also attempt to save Natalia. But the mountains had their say once again. The weather deteriorated completely. The Italian crew flew home, and the rescue operation was called off. Natalia remained alone in the white silence. On August 27th, the story took an unexpected turn. Mikhail Nagovitsyna, Natalia's son, appealed to the prosecutor general and the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry. My mother is an experienced climber. She holds the second sports rank, has strong health, and is in excellent shape. In the video I received, she is waving her hand 7 days after losing communication. I am confident she is alive. At least one more drone flyover. The video appeal reached the head of the Russian Investigative Committee, Alexander Basterkin. He promised to look into the matter. Another drone was launched. The operators peered at the screens, hoping to see movement. But the tent was silent. Natalia showed no further signs of life. A council of experienced climbers, convened by the company AKSI Travel, analyzed everything: the timelines, altitude, weather, conditions. The verdict was terrible but inevitable. Further rescue operations were pointless. In the mountaineering community after the tragedy on Pobeda Peak, voices emerged saying that saving Natalia was impossible from the very beginning. And it wasn't a matter of anyone's sluggishness or indifference. The mountains simply dictate their own laws, and even the most modern technology is powerless against them. The Mi-8 is a reliable machine, but its limit is around 5,000 meters. Natalia was lying at an altitude of nearly 7,200 meters. 4 high-altitude rescue operations, Eurocopter, AS-350 or H-145 models are typically used. Such a helicopter exists in the fleet of Kyrgyzstan's Ministry of Emergency Situations, but here begins a tangle of problems that is practically impossible to unravel. When you have expensive insurance, helicopter operations are paid for by the company, about 2,000 to 3,000 euros per hour, explains climber Irina Renova. But besides the machine, you need a pilot capable of working at such altitudes. The Kyrgyz don't have one. Coordinating for a foreigner to fly a government aircraft is unrealistic. And what if it crashes? Who will pay? Even the Eurocopter has limitations regarding altitude and wind. Chelyabinsk climber Alexander Ishchenko shared something that explains a great deal. Just 2 months before the ascent of Pobeda Peak, Natalia had broken her leg, a double fracture. Ishchenko was in the group that evacuated her then, in May, from the summit of Tekle Tor, 4,479 meters. I have one question. How did she end up there 2 months after a double fracture? He says, she acted irresponsibly. Perhaps the injury made itself known during the descent. Perhaps it was the weakened leg that failed at that fateful moment when she and Roman fell from the ridge. We will never know. Before Natalia, no one had ever been evacuated from Pobeda Peak. Her tent stood in the same mulda where the body of Mikhail Ishitin, a 2-time Russian mountaineering champion, lies. He died 10 years ago, a blood clot detached. A year later, his compatriots tried to bring him down but couldn't. In 2007, Sergei Baldanov, president of the Buryatia Sports Mountaineering Federation, died here. After ascending Pobeda, the captain of the Russian national mountaineering team, Nikolai Topminin, a 6-time snow leopard, one of the country's best high-altitude climbers, passed away. He climbed the mountain on August 10th, and the next day his heart stopped. By various estimates, Pobeda Peak has already claimed more than 100 lives. This is a mountain that does not give back its own. It turns out that Natalia's story is not someone's mistake, not foolishness, not indifference. It is simply a fatal confluence of circumstances arranged by the mountains into a deadly chain. She lay in the tent for many days, not knowing that Luka, who tried to save her, was already dead. Not knowing that the helicopter with rescuers had crashed on the glacier. Not knowing that Akimov's team had turned back just 600 vertical meters short of reaching her. She waved her hand at the drone from her torn tent and, probably, believed that help would come soon. And help was so close, and yet so infinitely far. The mountain led her on to its summit, but it did not let her go back.